This week's film was Brian De Palma's 1981 Blowout. It is a neo-noir Hitchcockian thriller based off of the 1966 Italian film Blow Up. It also combines real-life political intrigue. So Jack, a sound engineer for B-rate horror films, witnesses a car accident that kills a future presidential candidate, but he manages to save the woman sitting in the passenger seat, and then conspiracy and drama ensue. So, speaking about real-life political intrigue, this film kind of does an inverse Chappaquiddick incident, and the Chappaquiddick incident, for anyone unaware, is Ted Kennedy. I think he was the youngest Kennedy brother. He was out late one night driving with a political operative for his brother Robert Kennedy's presidential campaign. And they got in a car accident, and the car flipped over and landed in this tidal pond. And the woman, Mary Jo, I don't want to get her name wrong. Kopechne, 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 I don't know, Kopechne, probably. She ended up dying in this terrible car accident, and it was very tragic and not something to be laughed at. Anyways, and yeah, yep. Ted Kennedy, he didn't report the death until 10 a.m. the next morning, so it's led to a lot of skepticism about what really happened in that car. Like, there are some conspiracy theories that say there was a third person in the car. There are some that say Ted Kennedy was drunk, but there would be no way to know because he didn't report until the next morning. So whatever his blood alcohol level was, it was significantly lowered, or there was none once the police were able to test him.
This is our first recommendation. Usually we pick movies ourselves, and we go through the process of finding them. But this week, our Professor Hugh Manon recommended this film, and it was an interesting one. So thank you for the interesting recommendation. Just kind of a forewarning for anyone who wants to watch this film. There is a ton of nudity. There's some alluding to sexual assault. So just please be careful if you decide to watch this. It's certainly an R-rated film.
If we're also going to do other warnings for this movie, lots of graphic violence. Yes. That might have been implied, but like, if you are not a fan of incredibly graphic violence, don't watch it.
Yep. And to go briefly back to Flora's point about this being based off of a 1966 film called Blow Up, directed by Michelangelo Antonioni. His film is about a photographer who thinks he witnesses a murder, and he goes mad while analyzing the evidence. So Blow Out is sort of an answer to that, where John Travolta's character Jack also goes mad analyzing his evidence, much like Antonioni's character did.
Overall, I feel like it was like an interesting film. Like, it definitely felt like a unique plot. It wasn't boring. It wasn't like as slow paced as last week's film, Home Alone 3. But the ending kind of bothered me. First of all, it was kind of gross the way he used the audio. And second of all, like, kind of left the whole plot line of like the film unresolved. Like, he made a copy of the film, so either the copy got destroyed, he still had a copy back in his like office, and never really explained what happened to that. And like, no matter what happened, if I just had an answer, like, even if he didn't end up turning it in, I just wish they gave us an answer to that question, because it was kind of annoying not knowing.
And even so, the copy that he did make was only of the sound.
Exactly.
He didn't have time to make a copy of the actual footage. Mm-hmm. As John Travolta says in various points of the film, it could just sound like he made it in a studio recording, the audio in a studio recording. I thought the movie was really interesting. I enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I would. I was just like, oh great, another silly action crime thriller or whatever. But it kept me on my toes, like Ethan said. The plot, was not nearly as slow as anything, quite frankly, we've seen, doing the series so far and doing like classwork. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. Obviously, in comparison to last week's film, this is an action crime thriller and Home Alone 3 is a family comedy. So, it's all specific to genre, really. And I found that this thriller was one of the most interesting I've seen.
I'd say my first impression about it was, as Flora said, it reminded me a lot of the Chappaquiddick incident. So that's mostly what I was thinking about. I was also thinking about, I don't know, I thought it was interesting for John Travolta to be in this role, just from like an outside perspective. I don't know, because when I think of John Travolta, I think of Saturday Night Fever and Grease. So in my head, I was like, oh, it's interesting to see him in like a crime thriller kind of thing where he's the main character. So that was my impression. I also thought it was cool that they did something with sound engineering and made that kind of the plot, because as someone who's worked on like sound for lots of different shows.
Ava's a sound nerd. Okay, continue.
We don't normally get shown, and that whole process doesn't really get shown. And a lot of people don't know that movies actually do need recorded sounds and that those aren't just happening. So I thought that was cool to actually show that in a movie. I don't know if that's not really like relevant to what we're discussing, but that was my impression of it. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah, I like that too, especially like tying back to what we learned in class. Like, it was definitely interesting to see kind of what that actually looks like in the work that goes in behind filmmaking. I thought like it, while being a fictional film, it gave a little bit of like kind of actually like useful and interesting information at the same time.
I mean, obviously now doing sound type stuff is a lot more advanced than recording on tapes and stuff, but that's how it was back then, and it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed the film. I liked it a lot more than last week's. I thought it was, I feel like I've seen a lot of like crime thriller dramas, and this one felt interesting. It was kind of, it asked that question, like, what is conspiracy and what is truth, and where do those lines get drawn. I agree with Ava, though. I felt John Travolta was weird. I think that's mostly though because whenever I think of John Travolta, I think of him now, and whatever that is, whatever he's doing, whatever he's up to. I don't he's an interesting man, to say the least. So it was strange to see him be this character that, like, there were lines in this film that were very, very much so a product of their time. Like when in the motel the next morning, he was bullying her into getting a drink with him, and he was like, I saved your life, you owe me a drink. And it was like, oh, okay, like, sure, yeah, sure, whatever. But overall, I think he was people were trying, I think they intended to portray him as like sort of more emotional, I think, or like more, or like a kinder, like a kind man. I thought just like how soft spoken he was through a lot of the movie, especially when talking to Sally. But I just thought John Travolta was weird for that. But overall, I quite enjoyed the movie, but there were several lines that were remarkably questionable.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about this after Flora speaking to John Travolta, or Jack's, emotional, like trying to be portrayed as emotional. It's almost like they were trying to do a love thing of, or some romantic interest between Jack and Sally, but I just don't think it worked out. Like, this is better kept.
A crime thriller.
Yeah. And I think a lot of crime thrillers of the time tried to do something similar as well. You know, there's no crime without some femme fatale, and you know, some desperate emotional man trying to get in her pants. It just didn't work for this film, and it was much better, you know, just keeping that separate.
Why don't we talk about the history a little bit, like in relation to like other cinema, so the Hitchcockian influence. We see there was like this false opening to the film where it starts the film looking very, very different from what it is. So we're watching essentially a playback of like a slasher film, and within that there's a Psycho reference, right? When the guy, from his perspective, we get it from his perspective. He's holding a knife. There's a woman in the shower, and he is going to kill her, going to stab her several times. But then we realize, as she's screaming, that this is just something that the John Travolta character Jack is watching.
And it ends up being comic relief, much different to Psycho, when it's very much so not comic relief, and it's supposed to be something extremely frightening. And it's interesting, kind of taking a step back. The whole film is, you know, there's this whole simultaneous story of, we need to get this scream right for it to be horrifying, but it's just funny to us until then. And something we'll address later in this video, it ends up being extremely disturbing once they get the scream. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the Hitchcockian references. You know, Alfred Hitchcock's famous films, Vertigo, Psycho, The Bird, Dressed to Kill, etc., etc.
The Bird.
The birds. I said birds singular, didn't I?
Yeah, you said The Bird.
The bird.
The one bird.
The one singular bird in the film. But Blowout has many references to some of Hitchcock's work. As we mentioned earlier, the reference to Psycho, the shower scene, and the scream. Also, I noticed in a couple places, Danny Carp's apartment being one of them, and also in the end scene where Jack is running up the stairs to go save Sally. We see a lot of red and green, and this is most vibrant in Danny Carp's apartment, which I feel alludes to the Vertigo dining scene, where that scene has to be one of the most famous of Hitchcock's, just because of the amount of color used. It's almost astounding, and you really can't help but think of that, you know, if you've seen the movie, of course. So I thought that was a really interesting allude to his work. There were also several shots. Maybe Hitchcock didn't use them, but they felt very, very Hitchcockian. Especially the first bit of the movie, the first person walking into the shower, which we also mentioned earlier, along with some of the shots that we see of Jack on the bridge recording sound. The one that stood out to me the most, this happened a couple times during that scene, we would get zoomed out stills. So we would go freeze frame, not freeze frame, but you know, different sized shots of the location, and that introduced us to the scene a lot more, and almost was foreshadowing towards something, you know, fatal, and did a great job of building suspense, much like Hitchcock does in the majority of his films.
Yeah, I was gonna say I really like those shots, like on the bridge, like especially kind of right before the accident, kind of all those wider shots. I thought they were very like visually interesting. I think this added a lot of like interest to the movie, kind of made what could have been a kind of boring, long drawn out scene made it a little more interesting.
You know what's funny, Nicole? Just hearing you describe how it would like zoom out still, reminded me of the Psycho music, like the doo doo. You know what? Do you know what I mean? Like the famous
Yeah.
music. Just that, the way you described that. I wonder. I don't know if that could have been intentional. It might just be me making something up though. But
No, I totally agree with you. I
yeah.
didn't even think about that. That's
Yeah.
wicked cool. Yeah. There was also a couple times in the film, there were shots of, I believe the first one, I have to put Bart down as an example. So there were shots of Jack, you know, facing out, and he was really, really close to the camera. And in the background were two people talking, you know, about him when he was in the hospital. And then later on in the film, we see a very similar shot. It kind of parallels this shot we see of Jack, and it's Burke sitting there listening to this sailor dude and the sex worker sitting and talking about, you know, what their move was with like pavement and, you know, how they were going to get down and freaky. So I thought that was really interesting. It wasn't necessarily a suspense builder in my mind, but it was, you know, it almost felt intrusive. Like it's a conversation we shouldn't be hearing, and it's certainly a conversation the character shouldn't, you know, be hearing because they're not a part of it. In a way, we're a part of the conversation without being a part of it.
Let's go from the desk to our field reporter, Flora, who is outside on the scene.
Speaking about being on the scene, I am not from Philadelphia, but I am from Pennsylvania. I'm from a couple hours north of Philadelphia. So I've spent a good amount of time in the city. And it was fun to see Philadelphia. Like, I know there are a couple of movies, but I don't think like you know, obviously all of the Rocky movies are famous Philadelphia movies, but I don't think it's it's viewed as that much of an iconic city in like comparison to New York or Los Angeles or even Boston to some extent. So but it got me like curious, why Philadelphia? Because like there isn't like a huge movie industry booming in Philly, so like why is this sound engineer guy, why is his whole thing in Philadelphia? But as it turns out, Brian De Palma is a Philadelphia native, so kind of makes sense. I also wanted to speak about the accents. Like a lot of people weren't doing accents, but then it felt like the photographer, he was trying to do an accent. It sounded like Chicago though. Like Philadelphia accents are really, really weird. They like, it's a strange, I can only describe it, and I'm sure anyone from Philadelphia would hear my description and would laugh at me. But when I hear a Philadelphia accent, I always think of like SoCal mixed with the Midwest. Like it's bizarre. It's the weirdest thing. So the photographer didn't have an accent, and then Sally, I thought she was trying to do some weird New York accent thing, but it was not Philadelphian. Philadelphian it's unique. It's yeah. Anyways.
I know nothing about Philadelphia, and you know, before I actually looked up, you know, where this was taking place, I had no idea.
Oh yeah.
It was Philly. I thought it was somewhere in New Jersey, because New Jersey was referenced a couple times, but that's where Sally was trying to run away to.
Yeah.
After she got all the money and wanted to run away.
Speaking about sex workers, we're like we all kind of agreed that this movie, while it didn't have the most stellar representation of sex workers, it didn't paint them as inherently evil or like dirty or like skeezy, as I think a lot of other movies would have at the time and probably still would. Ava, you mentioned a really good point though about John Travolta's character Jack.
I think to a point it was an okay representation of sex workers, and like better than would have been seen at the time, and probably now too, because a lot of people shame sex workers in very bad ways. But John Travolta's character Jack was the only one who actually really shamed her, which was kind of sad because he was like the nicest character, and you'd think that him being close to her wouldn't, but he makes a nasty comment at some point about what she does, in which her response is that she needs money for it. I think actually this film portrays sex workers as in like what they're doing is bad, but they need the money, so don't hate them. Whereas it should be regarded as a profession that people do and shouldn't be shamed, because most of the people who shame sex workers benefit from them one way or another.
Right. Like, I think it'd be one thing if Jack turned around and at the end of the movie it was like, okay, like I was being kind of an asshole to you and, you know, I shouldn't have said those things. But he was like the morally redeemed character. Like, he was the good guy. He didn't have... Was there a lot of... Did he have any character development? Like, did we see a substantial arc in his character? I don't think we did. So yeah, it'd be one thing.
Flat.
Yeah, exactly. If he had learned the error of his ways and had changed at the end of the movie. But no, he was the morally right character from the very beginning. And so while saying that, it made the thing he said morally right too, when that is not true.
What bugs me about people who shame sex workers is that they're usually like 25-year-old dudes who still use Tumblr and are like, oh, sex workers are bad and women are horrible, and then go and watch porn. So like, honestly, I haven't met a person who shames sex workers but doesn't benefit from them. And that's what bothers me, especially about this film. Because they're shaming these, because he's shaming her, but like, where would you be if she wasn't there?
I think particularly in the scene where Burke chases down that sex worker, it's just out of pure resemblance to Sally, and same with the previous woman that was killed. It's just because they have blonde poofy hair doesn't mean they're all Sally. I hate to admit it.
Oh, this is our next segment, which is something annoying, where we all say something that we found really annoying or irritating about the film in particular.
I think that we kind of universally agreed that the most annoying tiny little, I guess it's not really tiny, but it was kind of an unnecessary detail, was the beginning of the movie. They are trying to find the perfect scream for this B-rate horror film, and the girl that they have doing it has a really bad scream, and they keep having like a rotating cast of women in and out trying to get the right scream. And so because Sally is wired when Jack sends her out to do this business with this TV man who turns out to not be who he says he is, news anchor. TV man,
the big TV man.
Yeah, big TV man.
Big TV man in the sky.
Yeah, exactly.
Frank Donahue, baby.
He has this recording of her screaming while she's actually being murdered, while she's literally being strangled and stabbed, and he uses it for this B-rate horror film. And like, you can tell it pains him. Like, he's sitting there in the movie theater watching it over with like a producer or someone, or like a director, and he has his ears plugged and he's like wincing, and it's like, you didn't have to do this. He's sweating. Exactly. Yeah.
He was profusely sweating.
Exactly.
Just in that scene. It was like, oh.
it was completely unnecessary for him to use this real life sound of this woman being murdered to death. Anyways.
And I also think, you know, if you're going to do a scream, it's going to be a lot more polished than someone who was murdered. But it's weird to think that people dubbed a scream over the scream that was used in the actual murder, but it's also the same scream that was used in this, you know, film. You know, it's kind of like this weird intrinsic thing that just really kind of messed with my head.
I'd say the thing that annoyed me the most is the film that they were making in the first place. Because, like, I know that they were making bad films, but what was even the plot? It was just all these random girls in college just, like, dancing.
Yeah. I think it was supposed to be a clip of some, like, shitty slasher film. But I feel like even in slasher films, the murdering happens in, like, steps. Like, this guy just went in to this sorority house and was like, it's time to kill. So it was a bad movie within a mediocre movie.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It felt very self-reflexive.
Yeah.
If we're going to go back to use classroom film.
Good word. Good. Yeah.
Yeah, I think what annoyed me most was, like,
Okay.
the fact they didn't finish the plot line of, like, the original film. Like, he like made a copy of this audio recording, so we still had that after she died, but he never showed him doing the recording. Like, he never showed him, like, actually showing the recording in the news anchor or anything. It's kind of stopped and just focused on that kind of subplot basically of her dying, I guess, in some ways.
It would be cool to see a sequel of sorts, but we all know how sequels go.
Poorly.
So
yeah.
Poorly. Precisely.
So at the end of these episodes, we like to kind of find one character we think may attend Clark. And yeah, so who do you guys think it may have been from this film?
The girl in the movie within the movie who lives next door to, like, the girls
Yeah.
who was
Yeah,
like, hey,
yeah.
study.
Yeah, her.
Yeah,
definitely.
Like
Smart
I'll agree
people.
with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like it's hard to pick a main character or at least a supporting character in this film who would have gone to Clark. But I agree 100% with that.
Yep, same.
All right, so at the end of each of these episodes, we go ahead, we tell you, is it worth the $5? In my opinion, it is. I really enjoyed the movie. I would watch it again. And, like, I would almost be excited if I found this in a $5 movie bin. I'd be like, yes, blowout. So I would rate this a $5 out of $5.
I think I would pay $3 out of $5. Because while I did find it interesting, it wasn't my favorite movie ever. And it kind of did throw me off with having John Travolta in that role. It just kind of messed up my brain. So I would rate it. I would pay $3 out of 5.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with Nicole. I would give it $5. I would pay $5 for it. I don't think it's a 5-star movie, but I would be willing to pay $5 for it. I think next time I watch it, though, I would be on my phone for about half of it. But I would still absorb it and enjoy it.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the middle. I think I'll give it $4 because, like, it was interesting and it was a good film. The ending really was like, no, I did not like that ending. I think the ending could have improved and maybe it would have been worth $5, but I think for me it would be $4.
Yeah. I would just like to say a quick apology if you got, like, motion sickness or seasickness looking at my my little Zoom window. People are doing work inside my house and it is super, super, super loud and they're walking back and forth. So I figured this would be better, but, like, was it? Who's to say?
Who's to say?
So yeah, it's very cold outside. I am shaking. The camera is bobbing up and down. So apologies.
And also on all of our behalfs, we are not in it today. So
yeah.
We are also sorry if we didn't bring the level of, excitedness that we usually bring. My brain's running on like 50% right now.
Okay, but one of us was on 100%, and that is Bart. Bart was
That is
Bart's
Bart.
always
Good
on.
job, Bart.
great the entire time. He made me laugh. He made me cry. He made me smile.
Yeah.
Yep.
This one
All
is
the
Beautiful
emotions.
insights. Truly a valuable member to our team.
Do you have anything to say, sir?
he's still getting over that laryngitis.
He's
Gotta be
shy.
patient.
He still has laryngitis.
Yeah.
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 Get better soon.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you would leave a like and subscribe. We hope to see you next week for our next video.
If you wanna comment what you thought, we would appreciate the feedback.
Not on this one. Not on this one. You can this
on any of our videos. On this one
one's
or
fine. Like we get it. It's
okay. Be better than this one.
Our last video, I feel, was our peak thus far. So go watch our previous video.
We already peaked. We're going downhill.
Yep.
There's only one direction, and it's straight down.
Yep.
Yes. Just kidding. We're not that horrible. But watch our last video on Home Alone 3 and watch our previous video before Home Alone 3 on Can't Hardly Wait. And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.